Thuliseak looked around the area they had set for the ritual, and noted all were in place, and all were nearing the levels of magic needed to enact their grand plan. It was to be something unheard of, something beyond reasoning to accomplish, even for the gods as far as they were aware, and yet here they were, making their plan to save them a reality, with the blessings of chrylsis himself. The vast Isle of the Dragons hung in the sky within the greatest lines of force, and pulled energies from it in vast torrents. They no longer needed the true prime fragment to stabilize their citadel, and instead it had been tasked with holding the immense power being pushed into it. It would hold indefinitely, and they had yet to discover if it truly had a limit to the reservoir it could contain. It would hold all they would need to make this work. It had to. There was no way they were going to fail in saving their existence, but also their knowledge. This was the only way given the time they had to work with, other than to flee to the multitude of primes and lose their domain. All who were capable of doing so gave their bodies in full to this ceremony, despite what it might mean for their continued existence once they had performed what was needed. An impossible task with unknown outcomes, but it was indeed their only action. Thuliseak stood before their assembled number and recalled what had been outlaid to them nearly a decade ago, and despite their pride in them being overwhelming, knew that their sacrifice might merely slow down what was to come, but questions were still left unanswered. They had been informed of what they knew of the situation, of the rips in the fabric of their prime, and the flooding power emerging from them. At first, they had all feared it was a grand invasion by something akin to Terraspine, but as they had been informed, it was much worse. Another prime had come close to their own, too close in fact, and had somehow managed to push the protective shell provided by chrylsis aside. What was happening was this other prime was colliding with their own. This was something never before witnessed, and none knew what could be done, if indeed anything. Thuliseak had entered the other prime and relayed all they could to them. The colliding prime was around the same size as their own and rich with magic, but seemingly totally devoid of creatures. It was as though it had been created and never touched by life, instead just holding raw, unbound magic. Thuliseak had told them they had never even known this prime existed until now, which, as it happened, was true. Somehow, that prime had drifted into theirs, although Thuliseak suspected not by accident, but could not fathom what could do such a thing. Manipulating the energies of a prime was one thing, and known to scant entities across time, even discounting the gods themselves other than chrylsis. So, this accident was to spell their end in due course, and there was nothing they could do to prevent it. The dragons had reasoned they would adapt to the magics and eventually have an elevated prime with levels of magic beyond their reckoning. Surely this would be a good thing. Thuliseak had informed them this was in fact incorrect, for even the prime itself had limits, or rather that the denizens of the primes had such, and even with their prowess and adaptability, it would prove too much for them in time. They had argued for a time about this until Thuliseak pointed out that, in the months since this had begun, many had begun to perish, and that their forms had only just started to adapt. Yes, they were harnessing the newly arriving power, but they were adapting too slowly to be able to keep pace, as the prime was only nearing, not entering their own yet. They would survive far longer than others native to here, but all others would meet their end in scant years if they did not act now and flee their home prime. The dragons stood fast in their belief that their wards and protections would aid them, and the others of the prime, and set about shielding and diverting magic around the realm. Several years had flowed by, and the warning had come to pass. More than 3/4 of the realm were gone, not dead, but eaten alive by the ravaging, invading magic of this other prime, eventually becoming one with the flow across the realms. All slain in this fashion were lost, unrecoverable by any means. The Shi'nites had announced this when their first priest had been lost and realized they could not find their existence anywhere, and nor could their god. The panic that ensued crippled all and pushed the demise of many more closer as they struggled to fight against it with the wards, only to discover, too late, that this in fact accelerated their final breaths. So, magic could not be used to protect them, as somehow it drew the other magic to them like a magnet. The only thing that gave any form of protection was Derathon, a rare ore that was magically inert, and it was powdered and used to make protective armor and trinkets to stave off the rising magic. It worked for a few years, but as the other prime finally touched their own, there was an increase in the incoming flow by a great many times, as a babbling brook to a huge waterfall, and those measures failed overnight. During this time, the dragons had been bolstered and had even chosen among their number to act as vessels for this power. They had been tempered, as had they all, by this encouraging power from another prime, but they had also been having their adaptation abilities greatly increased. They had been placed within the chamber with the true prime, and there had been multiple channeling devices set up. Here, the levels of magic would slay any knot of magical affinity, even their own kind, in mere seconds, as the energies were so high. In this place their strongest had sat, bathing in the ever-increasing power, drawing it into their forms, teetering on the edge of disintegration from raw energies, but also on the brink of adapting to such. It was the only way they could be sure their kind would continue to exist here and protect their secrets. They lost around 1/6 of their number to their inability to adapt to the change, and they would be mourned in time, but on the other side of the coin, they now had their remaining number tens of times more capable to survive their new conditions, and they found their new elevated form was much more readily able to adapt as their levels continued to rise. Thuliseak had informed that the levels of magic would soon surpass their adaptation ability, but some would not listen to this. After all, they had done so much already, and would push the boundaries yet further. Those opposing few continued to push their adaptation, and as predicted by Thuliseak, perished within months of trying, as they had reached what Thuliseak had said was their maximum of magical power. The others were shaken by this loss, but of course, they had been working on a plan to save all they could, and they just needed to become part of the largest ritual in known or recorded history. Thuliseak said he would move them and their entire domain to another prime, a safer prime. They of course agreed, and all began working as one to this end, to perform the seemingly impossible. But while the plan was made and set to take place, they were confronted directly by the words of chrylsis within the flow of the energies from this other prime. "I cannot allow you to traverse to another prime directly," the voice of the highest of the lights had said to them all. "Why?" had been the simple reply from many. "I cannot allow the one you all know as the Scourge to gain knowledge of such a process either now or in future times, so you will not perform this, Thuliseak." Thuliseak had pleaded their case for many days, trying to find ways of safeguarding this knowledge, but the simple fact remained. Should any of their kind ever be taken, he would gain such knowledge, and then the primes would fall with ease. "This knowledge stays with you, and you alone, child," chrylsis had said, and they had reluctantly accepted this, but still there had to be another way. chrylsis asked that they wait for 1 year while he selected a suitable prime, one where it would be possible to save as many as they could. The prime was selected, and chrylsis informed them of what was required. And so, the ritual was changed, the destination set, and something new was to be created, using the natures of those present to craft such. As the Nameless One had discovered, the dragons somehow knew of his identity, of his past. The reason being that they were indeed the distant descendants of the Scaled Ones that had once taught him. Through their ancestral memories they had held all the knowledge of the past, and with that a myriad of secrets, but more importantly, they had been born not of a prime, but of the plains, and they knew in the depths of their essences of the threat he presented to all such beings. Their nature would become their new home, their old true home. They would be remaking their place of ancestral creation using their own memories, and this would become secured to this target prime, allowing them to be a part of it all as well as their own residents. At least that was the aim. Thuliseak agreed to the terms and journeyed to this new prime, one they had not borne witness to until now. It was fledgling in comparison to the one he had just left, but it would suffice. The location was chosen for the draconic transference, away from sentient life, should anything go awry. A large anchor stone of Derethon was crafted, laced with true prime bindings, and their own unique glyphs, and it was attuned as needed along with smaller boundary stones which marked the boundaries of the dragon's citadel perfectly. This area was marked, energized, and then shrouded and protected from interference with their protections. Anyone walking into the area would merely be teleported to the other side. It was the safest way to ensure there would be no tampering with the site. Thuliseak left, assured the plan would work, and that a new region would be created upon the prime for those they were trying to save. Things, however, would not go fully as they had believed they would.